Hi, welcome to Capital City Church. We are so excited that you could join us for our online message. We have a special guest speaker. Her name is Alycia Wood, and she is an apologist. She works for Apologetics Inc., and the website is apologetics.org. So check it out and enjoy our message this morning.
Hi, friends. My name is Alycia, and I want to talk to you today about the story of Ruth. I think this is an incredibly important story, not just to understand about who Ruth was and her particular situation, but I think it helps us understand more about who God is. And so I want to take some time looking at the story and walking through kind of the narrative of it with you. But before I do that, let me just say that so often people think that the Bible doesn't have respect for women or looks down on women. But there are two actually letters in the Bible, or books in the Bible, that are named after women. One is Esther and one is Ruth. And in both of these stories, the women do remarkable things and are totally revered and honored. And in the story of Esther, she's a hero in a sense. So with that said, let's jump right in. You may or may not be familiar with the story of Ruth. I think it's an incredible story. And it starts off with her mother-in-law, a woman named Naomi and Elimelech, who are living in Bethlehem. Now, Naomi and Elimelech have two sons, and in Bethlehem, there ends up being a famine. And so they needed to move and leave Bethlehem for another place. So they decided to pack up and go to Moab. And while they were in Moab, there are two sons marry two women, one named Orpah and one named Ruth. And they lived there for a period of time, but after about 10 years or so, both the husband and the two sons die. So all you're left with is Naomi, the mother-in-law, and these two daughter-in-laws who've lost their husbands. And in this situation, in this era, when a woman doesn't have a man to be with, she can be in a very destitute situation. She can lose her land. She can end up in a life of poverty. And so Naomi's like, we have to leave here. We can't continue to stay in Moab. You two young ladies go back to your families, and maybe they'll take you back. But I've got to go back to Bethlehem and figure out what I'm going to do. So Orpah goes ahead and leave, but Ruth is insistent that she stays with her mother-in-law. And wherever her mother-in-law goes, she will go, and her people will be her people, and her God, her God. And so Naomi and Ruth head back to Bethlehem. And while they are there, they meet a particular man called Boaz. So let me help you understand a little bit about what the family unit looks like. In this particular culture, when parents have children, when their children are old enough to get married, the boys continue to live with them, and their wives that they marry come and live in this large household compound. Any daughters that they have would go off and live with their husbands in their compound. So you have in this household, you have the parents living, and then you have their sons with their spouses, all living in separate areas of this complete household or family grouping. And so when Naomi and Ruth go back to Bethlehem, they no longer have this household to be a part of because they don't have any of the men as the landowners. And so Naomi comes up with this idea that, you know what, you need to go and glean wheat from a nearby field. And this is a common practice. Actually, in Leviticus chapter 19, it actually is really clear that whenever you are a landowner and it's time for you to harvest from your land, you're only to harvest from the middle portion of your land, but you need to leave the outside part of the land unharvested, so that the widows and the orphans and the poor can come and actually take from there and eat. It was their way of caring for the poor. There's no social welfare system. There's no food stamps. It was their way of making sure that nobody went hungry. And so this is what Naomi is instructing Ruth to do, to go to this particular field and go ahead and glean wheat from around the edges. And if this had been a place where they grew grapes, any grapes that fell on the ground were for the widows and the orphans to pick up as well, and the landowner couldn't touch them. So Ruth does this because she's in great need of food, hoping that somehow, she can bring home enough for them both to eat. And the owner of the land, a guy named Boaz, notices her. And he inquires about who she is, and the people that are around tell them about who she actually is. And he's really kind to her. And Ruth goes home and tells Naomi about how she's met Boaz, how he's really kind to her. And Naomi has this idea. you should see if he would be open to marry you. You need to present yourself to him as someone who is willing to marry him. And so Ruth actually does this, and she presents herself to Boaz, and he totally gets the hint and gets the gesture and says, okay, I'd be open to marrying you. But first, before you do that, there's actually somebody else in line. There's actually somebody else that is supposed to be the one that if something was happening to your family, they needed to be the person to step in and help bring you out of your destitute situation. So first, let me go ahead and talk to this person. So Boaz goes and talks to him. This person says, you know what, I'm not interested in doing it. So Boaz feels like, okay, this is good, and I will go ahead and I will marry Ruth. And he does. So when Ruth first presents herself to Boaz, he praises her for not chasing after the younger men, whether they were rich or poor. He knew what she needed. She knew what she needed. She needed the right person who was good, who was kind, who was faithful. She needed the right person to save her from her situation. See, Boaz is what's called the kinsman redeemer. Now that sounds like a really big phrase. Let me just explain to you. Kinsman just means that he's related to her. And redeemer means that he is the one who helped bring her out of her situation. Let me explain to you what I mean. In that time frame, in ancient Israel, the Redeemer had a particular role. And it was whenever you had that family role where you got the father and the mother that are in charge of this family situation. When the husband dies, or when the father dies, the responsibility for the family goes to his eldest son. And he now takes over this household. In this way, you can make sure that the land is protected and the household is protected. So because they lost their men, Boaz steps in and he helps fill that place in their life. But here is the interesting thing. The role of the father wasn't just to run the household, but the father, if one of their children had ended up in poverty due to certain circumstances, or maybe one of their children had been taken by an enemy, or maybe one of their children or family members found themselves enslaved, it was the role of the father, whatever the senior male was, to go and get them and bring them back into the household. So if they were enslaved, it was the role of the father to free them from their slavery. If they were caught in poverty or they owed a debt, the father would pay that debt to be able to bring them back into the household. And that's why Boaz is called the Redeemer, because what the Redeemer did was went out after the person that was destitute because of circumstances in life, because of enslavement, because of poverty, whatever it was, and they had to bring them back into the household. And this is what Boaz does. He redeems Ruth, brings her in from being stuck with no household, no family unit to be a part of. And in her marriage to him, she now can join his. And he goes and buys Elimelech's land. And so therefore she can have land as well again. But this story isn't just about Ruth and Boaz, but it's actually about God's kindness to us. Many of you may have asked yourselves, why is it that we call God Father? And there has been multiple explanations or reasons given for why we would call God Father. But I think the one that makes the most sense to me is that when you think about this ancient Israelite culture, the father was the one who went out and redeemed the children who were outside the family and brought them back in. And when I look at the biblical text and I see how the Old Testament talks about these households, to me, what makes the most sense is that we call God Father because God the Father is the one who pays the price that needs to be paid to bring his destitute children, which is those of us who do not know him, who do not believe in him, and bring us back into the family. And so he pays the penalty, and the penalty was the life of his son. And he pays that penalty to bring the children back into the household. We call God the Father because he is the Redeemer. He is the one who goes and gets us when we're lost, when we're in our horrible circumstances, and he brings us back into the household of faith. This is why you hear Christians call each other brother or sister, or they call God Father, right? There's this relationship that you now have because you all who were outside the household have been brought inside. Now, one reason then people understand God as Father is because he's the Redeemer and he pays the ransom, which in our case is Jesus, so that we can come back into his household. So redemption is ultimately the means by which a lost family member is restored to a place of security within the circle of the family. And this is why Colossians chapter 1, verse 13 and 14 says, "For God rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." So why does this matter? Why do I spend this time telling you this really long story that happened thousands of years ago? Because I think this shows how much a distant God who seems so far away can actually be close and can actually see us. Because the reality is, as at one point in our life, we were all Ruth. We are all destitute. We were all hurting. We were looking for someone to see us, hoping that somebody would be kind and take pity on our situation and bring us into relationship that will ease the pain, that will give us a reason to live, that will give us a meaning to our life, that will answer the big questions we have about who am I and what am I doing here? Some that shows us that we matter, that we are actually loved, to show us that kindness. You know, when I look at what's going on with many of the mental health statistics in our culture, I recognize that we are really struggling. I want to read you a little bit of some of the studies from a study that I've seen recently, and this is what it says. It says between 2011 and 2021, the number of teens and young adults with clinical depression more than doubled. Between 2007 and 2019, the suicide rate for those in their early 20s rose by 41%. And it's even higher when it comes to 10 to 14-year-old girls. Almost 60%, in 2021, almost 60% of high school girls experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness during the past year. And nearly 25% actually made a suicide plan. Time magazine actually did an article not too long ago now. And in this article, they talked about how we are a culture that has destigmatized significantly the getting therapy and destigmatized mental health. And we have given people so many drugs to help them with whatever they're dealing with. Yet it seems like we're still sicker than we were before. They titled the article, Time Magazine titled the article, "Therapy Won't Save Us." And there's a bunch of reasons that they gave. They said, the DSM, which is, the standard text that psychologists and psychiatrists use for diagnosis. They say it's kind of subjective, so it can be hard to make an accurate diagnosis. They say some people are just misdiagnosed as a result, or maybe they're over diagnosed or over medicated. They can be disillusioned because maybe they went to a therapist and it didn't really work, and so they don't really want to go back again. They just feel like therapy just doesn't work. Additionally, the ineffectiveness of antidepressant drugs, as well as the system is oftentimes set up to help medicate somebody, but never really to change things in their life. And there's certain things in life that are just sad. If you've gone through divorce, if you've lost your job, or if you've lost a loved one, like these are genuine things that can make people sad. And it isn't necessarily that maybe medication is what needs to happen, but maybe how can we help them process through the life circumstances? So these are the things that Time Magazine is actually saying to kind of show that therapy won't help us. In other words, people, no matter what the solutions that humanity has come up with, they haven't been able to fix the human condition. We are still hurting. We are still sad. We still struggle to find reasons to live. And this is where I find Christianity really helpful, because what Christianity will tell us is not that things are going to go well here. There's nothing in the text that says, hey, when you become a Christian, everything is going to be great. You're going to be happy. Your kids are going to be amazing. Your husband, their wife is going to be amazing. You're going to have the best job. You're going to make money. It doesn't say that. What it does, though, is in this world where we're going to experience so much pain and hurt and struggles and suffering, it reminds us of a future hope. In other words, it says, look, this is going to be bad. We're going to struggle through this. But you need to put your hope in the fact that what is coming in the future, which is an eternity with God, as someone who believes in Christianity, as an eternity with God, is something that can't be changed because you lose your job. It can't be changed if you lose your house. In other words, that is your future hope. So you endure the pain and things now, knowing that one day you won't ever cry again. One day there won't be sadness again. One day there won't be pain again. And that is going to be an eternity in that state. So while it doesn't change things now, it does give us a bit of an ability to say, I can go on, I can endure because I know the end of the story and it ends good. And while that doesn't change everything, it does change the way that we approach pain in our life. Secondly, why does the story matter? Well, maybe you're somebody who's just caught up in maybe moral failures. Like maybe maybe you're struggling with lying or sexual immorality or bitterness or addiction or whatever it is. You can fill in the blank. Maybe your life is a mess. You know it. You want to fix it, but you feel like you can't fix it, like you're enslaved or you're stuck in a moral wasteland and you feel like you can't quite get out of it. Well, here's what's great about Christianity. It says, well, once you become a Christian, all those old things no longer define you. You actually can become somebody new. And there's actually a verse in the Bible that says that as far as the east is from the west, God's removed all of our failures and the things that we've done wrong, these things we call sin. He's removed these from us. In other words, he makes you into somebody new. And you no longer have to live your life hating yourself because you can't fix yourself and you can't get it right, because God actually helps you to live in the way that you ought. And so that sense of being stuck in this old person or not being able to be a new creation can leave a lot of people just feeling frustrated and disappointed in themselves because they can't seem to get them right. Or for some other people, maybe this story will matter to you because maybe you struggle with seeing why you're valuable. Why are you important? Why is it that you feel like you're abandoned? Or why do you feel lonely? Or maybe you feel desolate like Ruth was, and destitute. And maybe you struggle with, who am I? And do I matter? Is there a meaning to my life? Does it matter that I'm here? Does it matter that I'm not here? Maybe you're someone who struggles with just your existence and who you are. Well, one of the cool things is that when you become a Christian, you actually join a household, like I said. You join a community. You get brothers and sisters that do life with you so that you don't have to feel abandoned and you don't have to be lonely because you have other people who are with you. And when it comes to identity and how we can see ourselves and how we can know that we are important or that we're valuable, I think one of the ways that's easiest for me to think about this is, let's say we go to an art museum and we see this amazing painting on the wall, and the first thing that most people say is, who is this artist? Like, who did this painting, right? Because there's a part of us experiencing this artwork that isn't fully experienced unless we know who the artist is. And so we want to know who the artist is. So maybe we say, who is this artist? And if I said, well, the artist is me, you might be like, cool, maybe I can buy it for $50 from you, right? Because it's like, okay, Alycia, that's nice, but it's $50. But what if I said, like, the artist was Marc Chagall, or if it was Raphael or something like that? In other words, what if it was this really famous, well-known artist? Well, would you ask to buy the painting for $50, or would you ask to buy it for $5 million? In other words, it's the same painting, but all that changed with it was whose name was written on it. In other words, what gave the painting the value was not what somebody else thought of it, if they thought it was nice or not. It had everything to do with the artist who painted it. In other words, the creator of that determines the value of the creation. And while we sit here in our culture and we don't know, am I important? Do I mean anything? Am I valuable? As a Christian, I would say you 100% are. Not because of what anybody else thinks of you, or if anybody else thinks you're great, or if they think you're not great. It's all about the artist who painted you, but the creator who created you. That determines your value. And since you've been created by an eternal, all-knowing God, your value is infinite. The story of the Bible is a simple story, yet it's a long one. It starts off in this garden where you have these two people, Adam and Eve, who are in close relationship with God. Due to things that they did wrong, they end up no longer in close relationship with God. And the whole story from beginning to end is about how to bring people back into God's household. When I was in Canada several years back now, I was doing a session of talks, a series of talks with some other people there. And this particular venue we had was actually kind of out in the open in the student union. And all kind of people were walking by us as we were speaking. So in this particular day, I wasn't doing one of the talks, somebody else was, and a young Muslim girl walks by. And she looks at what's going on and kind of just like shakes her head. And so I get in a conversation with her and say, hey, what do you think of the talk and this kind of thing? And she's just like, I don't understand you Christians. So you Christians like to say, hey, you know what? I'm a Christian, so my works don't matter and the things I do don't matter. And she was like, what? She goes, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, how is it that you're saying that you can do whatever you want just because you believe by faith? That's why I said, well, that's a good question. That's a good question. And so what I went and said, well, it's not quite like you say it. It's kind of like this. Christians recognize that our acceptance with God isn't based off of our actions. It's totally based off of us believing, as the Bible says, believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord and confess with your mouth that God raised him from the dead. That's what it tells us. And to be back in united relationship with God. We confess that Jesus is Lord, that he doesn't just exist. Like, I mean, even atheists believe he existed. That's no big deal. Everybody believes Jesus existed. But that he truly is God, that he truly has the authority over your life, that you're going to submit your life to him. And you believe that he was crucified and God rose him from the dead, that he still lives. When you believe these things to be true, you're a Christian. And so then we do actions. Once we're already back in relationship with God because of our belief, because we've been forgiven of what we've done wrong, and he's brought us back into this household. Once we do that, now we do good things. Not to earn his love, we already have it, but we do these good things because we love him, because we care about him, because we're thankful for what he's done for us. And she says, oh, that makes sense. So it's actually as if heaven is God's house and you don't need the key. And I said, exactly. I don't need the key to this household because God has already gone out and got me and paid the debt that he needed to pay to bring me back in. It's like he opens the door for me and brings me in with him. There's a beautiful song that's a well-known Christian hymn, and it's called Because He Lives. And I just want to finish on just reading you some of the verses of this particular hymn. It says, God sent his son. They called him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy that he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future and life is worth the living just because he lives. You can easily be brought back into this household of faith by believing in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord and that God raised him from the dead. And that is the ultimate story of the Bible that I want you to take away today.